What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown, and we all know that 2020 was a blowout year for government spending. When you look at the total amount they spent, when you look at the taxes that came in, and when you look at how much the national debt increased by, we know 2020 was a big year for government spending, which is saying something because 2019 was actually a blowout year for government spending. Big giant deficits that helped along grow that national debt to new heights. And so following along the same pattern that we've had for decades in this country, 2021 looks by all accounts to be another year in the books for massive increases in government spending, along with massive increases in the national debt. And so that begs the question. We're all looking at Biden's spending plan. We see trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars. It seems like every day there's another, trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion of planned spending rolling out for various agendas, whether it's unemployment insurance or stimulus checks or eviction moratoriums or spending for green initiatives or infrastructure, whatever it is. We've got a lot of spending in store for us. It looks, as far as spending goes, it looks like Biden's team is taking a page straight out of the MMT playbook and going for gusto, saying it doesn't matter how much you spend as long as you spend it in the right way. So it begs the question, with all the increase in spending, who is funding it? Where is the money going to come from to fund all the extra trillions of dollars that they're planning on spending this year? The unspoken idea here is that we need to tax the rich and the corporations in order to fund all this extra spending. Now, it's not unspoken that there are plans to increase taxes, especially for the rich and for corporations, but it's the unspoken assumption that that is what's going to be funding all of the spending. So today, we're going to look at the truth. Do we need an increase in taxes in order to fund all this additional spending? And if so, or if not, what does that mean for you? Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so the truth of the matter is that in a fiat monetary system, you do not need taxes in order to fund government spending. The government doesn't need taxes, doesn't need a single dime in tax receipts. Just to show you what I'm talking about, let's look at a couple of charts. First, let's look at tax receipts, which is the income that the government generates over the last few years. Okay, so we're taking a look at this table, and let's look at 2016. We brought in $3.27 trillion, and it went up every year to 3.3 again, 3.46 trillion, and last year, 2020, 3.7 trillion. That's the estimated amount, according to thebalance.com. That's the estimated amount that will have been brought in for 2020 taxes. Okay, over 3 trillion and growing. That's a lot of money, right? Well, let's look at how much the government is spending. You take a look at this chart and you see in 2016, the government spent $3.9 trillion. Compare that with the 2016 $3.27 trillion they brought in income. Now let's look at 2017. The government spent $4 trillion. How much did they bring in 2017? $3.3 trillion. What about 2018? How much did the government spend? $4.1 trillion. How much money did they bring in? $3.3 trillion. Let's look at 2019. How much money did the government spend? $4.4 trillion compared to what they brought in, $3.46 trillion. And 2020, you can see that the spending reached $4.8 trillion versus the estimated income, $3.7 trillion for 2020. So it's abundantly clear there are not enough taxes coming in order to pay for the expenses. And aside from a couple odd years here and there, that has been the case for decades in the United States. The deficit is the name of the game. And just in case you're looking at these numbers and thinking, those numbers are actually pretty close. The deficit doesn't seem too bad. Well, let's take a look at one more thing. This is a chart of the national debt over the last couple of years. From 2016, it increased all the way from $19 trillion to the current amount of almost $27 trillion. Now, if you're good at doing math in your head, you're probably looking at this and thinking, that math doesn't add up. The national debt has increased by more than the cumulative deficits each year. Yes, that is true, and that is because the deficit really only accounts for on-budget spending. The government spends a lot of money that's not actually accounted for on the budget. So if you want to know what the true deficit is, all you have to do is look at how much the debt increases by every year. The government is like a bad spouse that has a secret credit card in their name that just keeps on loading it up with more and more debt, and it's causing a black hole in your budget that you don't know about, and you don't know where the money's going. It's blowing up your debt, but it's not actually on the budget that you set each month. So clearly the money that the government is spending is not coming from taxes, but it is coming from borrowing. So then you have to ask, who is loaning all of this money to the government? Well, yes, it's going to be some individuals. Yes, it's going to be some retirement accounts. Yes, it's going to be some banks and large institutions. And yes, it's going to be some investors and central banks from around the world. That's where some of the borrowing comes from for the government. But increasingly and more, the main lender to the United States government is the Federal Reserve. And no, they don't do this directly. They have to go through the primary banks, through the primary dealers. But essentially, that's where the source of the funds is coming from. The Federal Reserve is creating money that's ultimately going to fund the increase in debt for the United States government, to fund the deficit between its income and its expenses. So if everybody knows this, and if everybody knows the Federal Reserve can print enough money to basically cover the difference between taxes and expenses, taxes plus regular borrowing, and expenses. If everybody knows that difference can be covered by the Federal Reserve's printing money and being that lender to the government, why do they have to tax in the first place? Again, keeping with the spirit of modern monetary theory, there are really three reasons why a government who is being led along by, hey, spend whatever you want as long as you're spending it on the good stuff, why they would continue to tax. Number one is to punish the rich. And they don't use that language, but that's the reality of one of the reasons why they're going to continue and increase taxes, especially among the wealthy. The stated goal, the language they use, is to help with inequality. But when you take a step back, you realize, well, you don't need taxes for income. You can just print money for your spending. And so if your goal is to deal with inequality, there's no need to tax the rich to give to the poor. You can just write a check and give it to the poor. So you can deal with inequality just as effectively by writing checks to the poor as you can by taxing the rich. And so really it comes down to spite and contempt. Now, the second reason that they will give for why they have to continue taxing when they can print all the money they need is to deal with inflation. Because if you pour a bunch of new money into a system and it chases the same amount of goods and services and bids up the prices, and so prices start to rise, inflation starts to take off because of too much money. Well, at the same time then, if you tax the system, you're actually pulling money out of circulation. They can tax that money and destroy it and not spend it, right? They can have a surplus. That's the opposite of a deficit. So if inflation starts to take off, turn the government into having a surplus to take money out of the system, that would then have the opposite effect of inflation, right? It would cause deflation. Prices would fall. The demand for money would go up relative to goods and services. Now, given the economic climate, the chances that taxes would be increased enough to actually clamp down on inflation are basically zero. So this is a reason that they give, but it's not going to be reality in practice. Now, finally, and this is the kicker, this is the big one. Why do they still maintain taxes when they can just print as much money as they need? Here's the big one. It gives the currency intrinsic value. If you don't acquire enough of their paper currency throughout the quarter, the month, or the year in order to give enough of it back to them, you go to jail. The state uses their monopoly on violence to give their paper value. The value is staying out of jail. Now, Stephanie Kelton, she's the lady, she literally wrote the book on modern monetary theory. And she gives this beautiful example of what I'm talking about here, where she says, it's imagine like a dad who's trying to get his kids to do some chores around the house. So he makes up these coupons and he writes on there and he calls them dad bucks. And he says, hey, you do your chores throughout the week. At the end of the week, I'm going to give you some of these dad bucks. Well, obviously the kids know these dad bucks are intrinsically worthless. They can't go to the store and buy candy or toys with them. It's just paper that their dad created by printing and drawing on them, right? And so there's no demand for them. They don't want them, and therefore no chores get done. So the next week, the dad has another idea, and he says, okay, here's the dad bucks value that I've assigned to every chore, and at the end of the week, you all owe me, let's say 10 dad bucks. And if you don't give me 10 dad bucks at the end of the week, then you're either going to be grounded, or I'm going to take your Xbox away from you, or you're going to have some other form of punishment. Well, all of a sudden, those kids now recognize that those dad bucks have intrinsic value. They don't want to get punished, so they're going to do some chores throughout the week. They're going to earn those dad bucks, and at the end of the week, they're going to give them straight back to their dad to avoid punishment. It's important to pause here because this is how people with this monetary outlook view people. They view people as children that require the threat of violence for the sole purpose of accomplishing the goals of the state. Because if we didn't owe taxes in dollars, there would be no reason, no legal reason to acquire dollars throughout the quarter or the year. And if there's no legal reason to acquire dollars because we have to give them to somebody at the end of the year in order to avoid prison, well, why not start trying to get paid in Bitcoin or gold or silver or euros or some other form of currency? This could potentially start a snowball effect where more and more and more people decide that they don't want to get paid in dollars because other people are not willing to accept dollars for their products or their labor. And so they want to get paid in other things, meaning that the value of dollars just starts dropping because nobody wants to take them anymore because they don't have to turn any of them in at the end of the year. Now, if individuals, if contractors won't accept dollars as payment, that means that the government loses all of their power because all their power is sourced from their spending power. They have to pay soldiers, they have to pay government employees, they have to pay people to do the work. But if nobody's willing to accept dollars, it doesn't matter how many trillions of dollars the Federal Reserve prints, nobody's going to take them for payment. So the state must use the threat of violence to ensure prolonged acceptance of their currency. They maintain their spending power, which is the source of the rest of their power. So what can you do about it? Well, the fact is that the entire tax code is written in order to give people ways to pay less in taxes. It's not the other way around. The tax code is not there in order to say, here's all the ways you owe taxes. The tax code is there to say, here's all the ways you can pay less in taxes. That's never changed and it's never gonna change. Doesn't matter who's in office, doesn't matter who holds the Senate, doesn't matter who holds the House. That's what the tax code is for. And regardless of what tax changes happen this year, next year, into the future, the rich still aren't going to pay any more taxes. High earners, high income job holders will pay more in taxes. People like doctors and engineers and lawyers, people with W-2 wages that, they make a lot of money in a year, but they're still just an employee. They'll get the brunt of it. But the real rich don't earn income. They have income, passive income and portfolio income. They have assets that give them capital gains. They have corporations that take advantage of doing all the things that the tax code says to do in order to get these tax benefits. And even if capital gains taxes skyrocket, like some people are saying that this new administration wants to do, won't matter because the rich just aren't going to sell their assets anymore. They're going to hold on to them and just take out loans collateralized by the asset. Debt is not income, so just take out a loan against it and that you've solved your problem. You don't have to pay taxes on gains because there's no realized gains. So the rich have nothing to worry about, but also the poor have nothing to worry about here because the poor aren't going to get extra taxes. That would be political suicide in the current environment. They're going to get the handouts and they're going to get the tax breaks. The ones who are really screwed are the high income, middle class employees. Now, there's a fantastic illustration by Tom Wheelwright in his book, Tax-Free Wealth. Highly recommend this book if you want to learn more about taxes. But he basically says it's the most patriotic thing you can do to pay as little as possible in taxes. And here's why. You've got two types of people out there. One type of person says, I really trust that our government and our leaders are doing the best thing possible and guiding our country in the right direction. The other group of people says, I highly distrust our leadership and think that our leadership is taking our country in the wrong way, the worst way possible. Let's say you're part of the first group and you think the leaders have done what they can and I think that following their leadership is going to move our country in the right direction. Well, they're the ones that designed the tax code. And they wrote into the tax code, hey, if you do things like provide affordable housing, if you do things like investing in, let's say, a change comes up and there's, tax credits and benefits for investing in green technology, you start to align your life around the ways that our leadership has said, these are good for our country, you're going to get tax benefits. It's patriotic then to not pay taxes because you're designing your life around the way that our leaders say is good for our country. Now, let's say you're the opposite. Let's say you distrust our leadership and you say every dollar they take is a dollar misspent. Well, don't you think that you're going to do a better job with your money then for our country? That by you spending that money, as much money as you can in the way you think is beneficial is going to be more beneficial for our country than by just allowing incompetent leaders to take that money and spend it for you? So either way, Whether you highly trust our leadership or highly distrust our leadership, it is the most patriotic thing possible for you to do to design your life in a way where you legally pay as little taxes as possible. So, is spending exploding this year? Absolutely. Are taxes going to increase? Most likely. Is that necessary? Not at all. What is the result of this going to be? Higher inflation. What can you do about it? Get your finances in order. Don't be that high income earning employee. Start designing your life in a way where you run a small corporation. Maybe it's better for you to be a contractor for your specific job. Maybe you get your finances sorted out in a way where you are structured in the way that our leaders say is good for our country, and you can pay less taxes as a result. And of course, do what you can to buy assets, and especially inflation protected assets. If you're interested in learning more about how to buy gold, how to buy silver, how to buy Bitcoin, how to buy real estate, learning about trading options effectively and more, I've got all of my recommended resources linked in the description below. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Have a good day.